Emily grew up hearing the roar of engines echoing through the small town of Daytona Beach, Florida. While other girls played with dolls or hung out at the mall, she spent her afternoons inside her father's garage, Jack's Auto Repair, a humble workshop just a few blocks from the legendary Speedway. The air always smelled like burnt oil and strong coffee. Her mother, Susan, used to joke, "Around here, love smells like gasoline." And in that grease-stained, tool-cluttered garage, Emily found her calling. Jack never treated Emily like she was delicate. On the contrary, he put a wrench in her hand before she could ride a bike. "Listen close," he'd say, placing her hand on the hood of an idling engine. "If you know how to hear it, the car will tell you everything." She learned to detect problems by ear, to feel misfires through the vibrations. Her fingernails were always stained black, no matter how hard she scrubbed, and instead of prom dresses, she wore coveralls with her name stitched in red thread. The world of racing felt a million miles away, reserved for wealthy drivers with massive sponsors. But every Sunday, she and her dad would listen to NASCAR races on the old shop radio. Jack explained every pit strategy and engine tweak like a professor. Emily didn't say it out loud, but she dreamed of being out there herself, not in the stands, on the track. It was a dream she held tight and quietly, because no one in town would ever believe it possible. At 18, Emily inherited a beat-up 1978 Chevy Nova that her father had lovingly rebuilt with her over the years. The car looked like it had been through a war. Rust patches, dents, and faded blue paint told its story. But beneath the hood, it was a mechanical masterpiece. It wasn't just a car, it was part of the family. And when the motor roared to life, it felt like her own heartbeat echoing back. Her chance came when Daytona International Speedway announced a special open entry race, an exhibition where even amateurs could try their luck against professionals. The entry fee wasn't cheap, but Emily had saved every dollar she earned doing brake jobs and oil changes. With a silent nod from her father, she signed up. On race day, she pulled into the lot in her Nova as others arrived with million-dollar trailers and high-tech pit crews. Drivers with glossy uniforms stepped out of sleek machines, while Emily parked quietly and stepped out in her oil-stained jumpsuit. Laughter and side eyes followed her as she rolled past rows of chrome-wrapped speed demons. To them, she was a joke, background noise at best. At the top of the stands sat Carter Blake, the billionaire owner of Blake Performance Racing. Known as the King of Daytona, his name was plastered across everything from track walls to merchandise booths. With a Rolex on one wrist and a toothy grin, he oozed confidence. Magazines praised his genius innovations in stock car design. But to Emily, he was more than a public figure. He was the man whose fame had been built on someone else's brilliance. She approached the registration table, pulling out a wad of crumpled bills. The official raised an eyebrow but took her name. Soon, word spread like wildfire. "Some mechanic's daughter thinks she can race." The whispers reached Carter Blake in minutes. Smelling an opportunity for attention, he descended from his suite, cameras in tow. With a crowd forming, Carter circled Emily's Nova with mock concern, pointing out rust spots and missing trim. His voice boomed, "Real racing takes more than dreams and duct tape, sweetheart." Laughter erupted from the crowd. Then he made an offer, public, theatrical, and cruel. "If you beat even one car in time trials, I'll personally sponsor your career," he said, pausing for dramatic effect. "But if you don't, you're done. Off this track, forever." The crowd cheered and jeered, loving the spectacle. Emily, standing with quiet resolve, simply nodded. Then added one condition of her own. "If I win, you tell the truth about where your revolutionary car designs really came from." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Carter's smile faltered for a second, but just a second. He extended his hand, amused, and sealed the deal with a smug handshake. Emily returned to her car and waited. Professional drivers took their laps first, roaring past the grandstands in sponsored glory. Pit crews analyzed performance with tablets and data feeds. Meanwhile, Emily made final adjustments using only her hands and instincts. No gadgets, no sensors. She could tell by sound and feel if the timing was off, and she made small tweaks no one noticed. When her name was called, most spectators had already moved on, expecting a joke or a breakdown. Her Nova rolled slowly to the start line. Dull paint, no logos, just the number 18 painted by hand. She gripped the wheel. The green flag dropped. Emily's Nova launched off the starting line with a deep growl that turned a few heads. It wasn't fast in the way the others were. There was no sleek bodywork or computerized traction control, but it moved with unexpected precision. The first few corners came and went, and to the surprise of the few still watching, Emily held her line. No oversteering, no skidding. Just smooth, controlled driving, like someone who knew her car better than she knew herself. In the pits, a few of the older crew chiefs paused their conversations to glance at the track. "That thing's running tighter than it looks," one muttered. Another raised his binoculars. "Who the hell is she?" Lap after lap, Emily pushed the Nova further. While other cars relied on team strategy and telemetry, she listened to every sound the engine made, feeling each vibration through the steering wheel. She drove without fear, but not recklessly. Her timing was sharp, her cornering, daring, and her confidence, unshakable. Back in the VIP suite, Carter Blake's smile had vanished. He leaned forward, watching the monitor, as Emily overtook a car worth more than 10 times her Nova's value. One lap later, she passed another. Gasps echoed from the grandstands. People who had scoffed earlier were now standing up, eyes wide, phones out. They weren't sure what they were witnessing, but it wasn't supposed to happen. The scoreboard refreshed. Emily Montgomery, 3rd place. It hit the crowd like a thunderclap. 3rd, against seasoned professionals. In a rebuilt streetcar with no sponsor logos. The disbelief was immediate and quickly followed by applause. Scattered at first, then rising like a wave. She wasn't just surviving the race, she was making history. In the pit lane, reporters swarmed. Who is this girl? Where did she come from? Is this real? The cameras shifted from the polished drivers to the grease-covered teen in the battered Nova, now cruising past the checkered flag. She had done it. She had beaten multiple professional racers. She had kept her word. Emily pulled her car to a stop and stepped out, sweat on her brow, her jumpsuit clinging to her arms. The crowd, which once laughed at her, now cheered as she walked straight toward the VIP tower. Carter Blake waited, trying to maintain his composure. The cameras caught every second as she stood before him, firm and calm. "I did my part," Emily said. "Now it's your turn." Before Carter could respond, she reached into her car and pulled out the worn leather folder she had kept hidden under the passenger seat. It was thick, old, and stained with years of oil and time. She opened it slowly, revealing pages of handwritten diagrams, blueprints, and technical notes, each one signed by a name long forgotten by the racing world. Sarah Montgomery. The crowd hushed. The papers looked authentic, dated, annotated, and terrifyingly familiar. "These designs," Emily continued, her voice clear but strong, "belong to my mother. She worked at Blake Engineering long before you took it over. Every so-called innovation you've claimed over the last 2 decades, these were hers." Carter took a step back. Sarah Montgomery had been a lead engineer before Blake Performance Racing even existed. She had created suspension systems, aerodynamic concepts, and chassis blueprints that later became the cornerstone of Carter Blake's empire. But her name had been erased. After a mysterious car accident in 2004, no one spoke of her again. Until now. Emily held up a specific document, an early prototype of the exact suspension system Blake had patented in 2006. The signature on the bottom corner was clear: Sarah Montgomery, with a date from 3 years prior to Blake's first official design. The crowd gasped again. One of the engineers from the paddock stepped forward and examined the paper. "This is real," he said. "I worked on this. We were told it was Carter's idea." Reporters surged forward. Microphones surrounded Emily. Her calm never wavered. My mother was silenced. Just before she went public with proof, her brakes failed. They called it an accident. We believed it was sabotage. We've kept everything, every blueprint, every letter, every threat. Carter tried to laugh, waving it off as a conspiracy theory. This is ridiculous. She was one of many. Those ideas were developed by a team. But no one was listening. Not anymore. Emily pulled out a flash drive and handed it to a reporter. "There's more," she said. "Emails, video recordings, technical documents. We've waited long enough." The reporters scattered, racing to break the biggest story motorsports had seen in decades. The crowd was now firmly behind Emily. Carter Blake's empire began to tremble, live on camera for the entire country to see. And in the center of it all stood a girl from a small-town garage, holding her mother's legacy in one hand and the future in the other. The silence that fell over Daytona International Speedway was heavy. Just minutes ago, the crowd had been cheering for an underdog victory. Now they stood frozen, witnessing the unraveling of a legend. The diagrams in Emily's hands weren't just old papers. They were the blueprint of a lie that had built Carter Blake's fortune and buried her mother's name. One by one, engineers and former colleagues came forward. A few recognized the handwriting, the unique markings, the layout of the technical drawings. One man, gray-haired and shaking slightly, took a page and stared at it for several seconds before whispering, "She showed me this in a meeting. I remember. We never saw her again after the accident." Carter's attempt to control the moment faltered fast. His smile turned stiff. The press swarmed Emily, asking question after question, but she didn't rush. She opened the folder and laid it all out on a table in full view of the cameras. Schematics, patent drafts, hand-signed calculations, early testing logs, all attributed to Sarah Montgomery. Many of them bore dates years before Carter's patents ever existed. Emily's voice remained calm. "My mother designed everything. She trusted the wrong people. And she paid for it with her life." The audience murmured uneasily. Security guards shifted nervously. The whispers in the paddock turned to outrage. Emily continued. "She kept copies. She knew what they were doing, and right before she was going to come forward, she died on Highway 4. Her brakes failed. They said it was a tragic mistake. But we know better." Gasps broke out. People looked at each other, stunned. A few even stepped away from Carter Blake. Someone in the crowd shouted, "You murdered her!" He didn't respond. He couldn't. Emily handed over a mechanic's report from the night before her mother's accident, evidence of brake tampering, never officially filed. The mechanic who wrote it had vanished. The police report? Missing. All swept away 2 decades ago. But the pieces, preserved by her father and hidden all these years, told a chilling story. Carter finally spoke, voice tight. "This is a smear campaign. That woman had issues. These designs were created by teams, by departments. We've built a legacy through collaboration, not theft." But no one clapped. No one cheered. Then came the final blow. Emily pulled out a tablet and played a video for the press. The screen lit up with a grainy but clear recording. Her mother, Sarah Montgomery, seated in a small office holding a series of sketches, explaining her designs. Calm, professional, brilliant. She didn't just outline the engineering, she named names. She spoke of being isolated, ignored. She detailed conversations with Carter, who at the time was just a young executive with ambition and a flashy smile. "I know what they're doing," Sarah said in the recording. "They're erasing me from my own work. If anything happens to me, Jack has the files. He'll know what to do." People wept openly. Reporters turned their cameras to Emily, who stood with tears in her eyes but didn't break. "This video was recorded 3 days before the crash," she said softly. "My father saved it. He promised her he would protect her work, and I'm here to finish what she started." The crowd erupted, not in rage, but in raw emotional support. What had begun as a race had become a reckoning. A young woman had faced a giant, and pulled the curtain back for the world to see. Investigative reporters from major outlets began arriving at the track. They demanded interviews, access to documents. Legal experts chimed in live on TV. Commentators who once praised Carter Blake now scrambled to distance themselves. Former employees spoke up. Some had stayed silent out of fear. Now, empowered by the moment, they revealed details of long-buried wrongdoing, ideas stolen, records edited, voices silenced. The motorsport world shook. Sponsors pulled ads. Blake Performance Racing stock dropped. One racing team announced it was withdrawing from any future collaboration with Carter's organization. Another declared support for Emily and offered to help digitize and archive her mother's work. Meanwhile, federal investigators took notice. Sarah Montgomery's death, long considered a tragic accident, was now officially reopened as a potential criminal investigation. Back in the garage area, Emily sat quietly beside her car. Her father, Jack, joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said it all: pride, love, and the weight of a promise fulfilled. Above them, the sky over Daytona began to darken. Not from rain, but from the gravity of truth finally coming to light. Emily hadn't just raced a car that day. She'd raced against time, history, and power. And she'd won something far greater than a trophy. But deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over. There were hearings ahead, courtrooms, depositions, questions that needed answers. But for the first time in 20 years, the name Sarah Montgomery was back where it belonged, on the lips of the entire nation. In the weeks that followed the Daytona explosion, Emily's story spread like wildfire across the country. Morning shows, news specials, podcasts, everyone wanted to talk about the mechanic's daughter who brought down the king of American racing. But behind all the headlines and hashtags was something more powerful, a truth that could no longer be hidden. Federal investigators moved quickly. The documents Emily presented formed the backbone of a massive inquiry. Patent theft, corporate fraud, and the potential sabotage of Sarah Montgomery's vehicle now formed the basis of a federal case. Emily and her father, Jack, were called to testify before a grand jury. They handed over every file, every letter, every trace Sarah had left behind. The spotlight could have overwhelmed Emily, but she handled it the way she handled her Nova: steady hands, clear mind, heart full of purpose. She declined most interviews and kept her focus on one thing: clearing her mother's name. Carter Blake, meanwhile, saw his empire collapse. Sponsors disappeared overnight. Investors pulled out. His company's stock fell to pennies. Public opinion turned cold. Former allies went silent. And then came the charges: multiple counts of intellectual property theft, obstruction of justice, and securities fraud. Though the criminal investigation into Sarah's death remained open, enough evidence surfaced for a civil trial, where Carter was found liable for wrongful death. His fortune was dismantled, his legacy erased. The man once praised as a visionary became a cautionary tale. Carter Blake's name was stripped from race programs, removed from trophies, and erased from industry plaques. But this story was never really about him. Months later, Daytona International Speedway hosted a new race, the Sarah Montgomery Memorial Classic. It wasn't just a competition, it was a tribute. The same stands that once laughed at a young girl in a rusty Chevy were now filled with people wearing shirts that read, "Built by Sarah, driven by Emily." Emily stood on the starting line, her Nova freshly tuned, her mother's leather folder strapped in the passenger seat. Her father, Jack, stood by the pit wall, holding a stopwatch like he used to when she was a little girl pretending to race in the driveway. As the engines roared to life, Emily looked to the sky and smiled. This time, there was no pressure, no point to prove, just legacy to honor. She took the lead on the final lap, not because she needed to, but because it felt right. When she crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted, not for a win, but for what that lap meant: the closing of a wound 20 years deep. After the race, Emily walked to the center of the track. She raised the leather folder high above her head, and the crowd stood in silence, hands on hearts, eyes filled with tears. In that moment, Sarah Montgomery was no longer a forgotten name buried under corporate lies. She was the woman who changed everything, and whose daughter refused to let history forget. Emily didn't stop there. She founded the Sarah Montgomery Foundation for Engineering Excellence, aimed at supporting young women in motorsports and mechanical engineering. The first year, the foundation awarded 10 full scholarships to female students from small towns, just like her. Their applications cited Emily's story as their inspiration. Race teams across the country began reviewing their archives. Sarah's name was added to patents. Her designs were formally acknowledged in industry publications. The engineering community embraced the truth. Slowly, history was corrected. Emily's racing career continued, but on her own terms. She turned down high-paying contracts from corporate-backed teams that didn't share her values. Instead, she joined a small team focused on transparency and innovation, principles her mother had lived by. Race after race, Emily showed she wasn't a one-time miracle. She belonged. She competed with skill, with grit, and with the kind of knowledge that couldn't be taught in books, only passed down through generations. Reporters sometimes asked her if she ever forgave Carter Blake. She always gave the same answer. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth." 1 year to the day after her breakthrough race, Emily returned to the track, not to race, but to speak. She stood before a packed stadium and said, "My mother's voice was taken from her, but mine won't be. This is for every woman who was told she didn't belong in the garage, on the track, or in the room. We're not asking for permission anymore. We're here to build." The crowd rose to their feet. Mechanics wiped their eyes. Young girls hugged their parents. Something had shifted, not just in racing, but in the way stories like Emily's were finally being heard. So now, as you sit with this story, what do you think? How many names have been erased? How many voices still need to be heard? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. And if you believe stories like this matter, follow the channel for more powerful narratives that prove truth always finds the wheel.